Take a look at this. Startups, number of startups and firm startup rate. These are both down. The actual number of startups is considerably smaller today by about 150,000 than it was back in the early 70s. The startup rate has nearly cut in half. You can see we were up at around over 15% back in the 70s. We're about 8% today. This includes, by the way, all firms. This includes corporations, partnerships, LLCs. The only thing it does not include is sole proprietorship, Schedule C that you fill out because you're just self-employed. Everything else is included here. This is census. This is the Census Department Census of Business. Next, take a look at this. Is the same number, the startup rate, but here we talk about the share of employment at startups. And again, you see the decline throughout the 70s and 80s. About 4% of Americans were employed at firms that were less than 1 year old. I would define that as a startup, right? Less than 1 year old, I guess you're a startup. Today, it's around 2%. Half the share of Americans are employed at startups than they used to be. Now, this next chart is interesting, and if you're curious about this, the London School of Economics has actually something called Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, which actually looks at attitudes and behaviors, does surveys on entrepreneurial behavior. But another big one is the Kaufman Foundation. And take a look at this. Now, this has kind of a very entrepreneurship. They define it very liberally. I mean, even a self-employed person can be is said an entrepreneur. And you can see the one thing I want to point out is here. This doesn't actually show much of a shift in entrepreneurship rate. But one thing it does show is a distinct decline in young people. That's what I want to get at. And that's interesting because the biggest decline in startups, as measured by most people, has been young people. Everyone thinks that, millennials are all out, I don't know, Silicon Valley, Seattle, they're all doing startups. No, today they go to Silicon, they get as good a degree as they can, and they go to Silicon Valley to get hired by an X or her boomer who did a startup, right? I mean, that's the millennial formula to success. Why? Startups are too risky. I hear that all the time from millennials, and it comes through in the survey data. Why in the world do you want to start up? My God, staking your whole career on something like that? I mean, that's crazy.